Guys, I got something a little bit different for you tonight on Mysteries Unknown. I get a lot of stories sent to me that never make it on the show, either because the people don't want to come on the show and tell their story, or, they're just encounters that I've seen from across the U.S. that get sent to me. And I thought that instead of these stories just sitting there and never seeing the light of day, I thought I would just do like a story time episode, maybe every Thursday or Friday, if you guys like this. Don't worry, every Monday there will be a real person telling their interview or telling their encounters. That's not going anywhere, but just trying to think of ways to give back to you guys. And some of these stories are so incredible that they need to be heard. So we're going to be talking about some encounters from the state of Washington tonight. Some of these are very incredible, but towards the end of the episode, I've got an encounter from a home state of Arkansas. This has got to be one of the most scary, incredible encounters I personally have ever heard. The gentleman wanted to share it but didn't want to come on the show, but this Bigfoot creature does some strange things. I've never seen or heard of one of these creatures doing what this thing does. So you need to make sure that you stay so you hear that. It's incredible. But let me just think about this format. And as always, guys, if you've got an encounter you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. I appreciate everybody out there, but let's jump right into the stories and we'll see you at the end of the video. It was late October, about 4 years ago. I had taken a solo camping trip to the Olympic National Forest in Washington State. I love the solitude of the woods, and it was the perfect place for me to clear my head. I set up camp near a small stream. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. It was serene. Just me, my tent, and endless expanse of towering evergreens. After dinner, I stoked the fire and settled in with a book. That's when I first noticed it. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but no. There was a faint, rhythmic sound. It wasn't the rustling of the wind or the bubbling of the stream. It was heavy footsteps. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a deer or an elk, but then I heard it again. Closer this time, slow, deliberate. The kind of steps that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No answer, just silence. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it towards the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, but all I saw there were trees and shadows. I told myself it was nothing, probably just an animal curious about the smell of my campfire. About an hour passed, and I'd almost convinced myself to relax when a loud crack shattered the quiet. It was the sound of a tree branch snapping, and it came from just beyond the firelight. My flashlight swept across the woods again, and that's when I saw it. Two glowing eyes reflecting back at me. They were higher off the ground than any animal I'd ever seen. The shape was massive, easily 7 or 8 foot tall. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away. The creature stepped closer, just enough for the firelight to catch its outline. It was covered in dark, matted hair, and its shoulders were impossibly broad. It didn't move like a bear. Its steps were smooth, purposeful, almost human. I didn't dare move. I just stood there, locked in place, gripping my flashlight like it was a weapon. For a moment, it looked at me, really looked at me. It wasn't just an animal gaze. It was intelligent. Then, as quickly as it had happened, it turned and melted back into the woods of the forest. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire going until dawn, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sending my heart racing. By morning, I convinced myself to look around the area. About 30 feet from my campsite, I found them, footsteps, huge ones. Each was at least twice the size of my boot, with deep impressions in the soil. I packed up and left that morning. I haven't been back to the Olympic National Forest since. Some people I've told the story to think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear and it wasn't a person. Whatever it was, it's still out there. The Rock Tower in Olympic National Forest. They say the woods have a way of humbling you, of reminding you how small you really are. I learned that lesson the hard way 2 summers ago while hiking in the Olympic National Forest. I wasn't alone that day. My buddy Jake and I had decided to tackle a remote trail we'd heard about. It was one of those paths that didn't show up on most maps, untouched, wild, and completely off the grid. We were about 10 miles in when we found the perfect clearing to set up camp. The rain started just as we got the fire going. It wasn't heavy, just enough to add a misty chill to the air. We sat under a tarp, eating freeze-dried meals and laughing about how unprepared we were for the weather. That's when the first rock hit. It wasn't big, just a pebble really. It landed a few feet from the fire, and we both stopped mid-laugh. "Did you throw that?" Jake asked. I shook my head. "I thought you did." We scanned the tree line, but it was too dark to see much beyond the dim glow of fire. Then came another rock. This one was bigger. It smacked into the ground with a dull thud, closer to us this time. "All right, who's out there?" Jake yelled, standing up and shining his flashlight towards the woods. Silence, just the sound of rain and occasional crackle of the fire. We joked nervously that it must have been some animal knocking rocks loose, though deep down, neither of us believed it. But then the third rock came, and this one wasn't small. It was about the size of a softball, and it landed right in the middle of our campsite. Jake was visibly shook, and I could see the tension in his face. "That's not an animal," he muttered. The air felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. We both stood there, flashlight scanning in the dark, when we heard it, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before, deep, resonant, and terrifying. And then we saw it, just for a moment. As a flashlight beam swept past the trees, a massive figure, half hidden behind the trunks. Its eyes reflected the light like an animal's, but its size, it was monstrous. The growl came again, this time louder, and that was all the convincing we needed. We grabbed our packs and bolted down the trail, leaving the fire smoldering behind us. Even as we ran, we could hear something moving parallel to us in the woods. Heavy footsteps, snapping branches. It didn't chase us, but it made sure we knew it was there. We made it back to the car just as the rain stopped. Neither of us spoke on the drive home, but we both knew what we'd encountered. Whatever threw those rocks wasn't a person, and it wasn't an animal. We'll get back to the show in just a second, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for liking and watching this video. Would you guys consider being a member? I got all kinds of cool things coming down the pipeline, lots of perks if you join and become members of this tribe. We're building a really cool community, so be a part of that, be a member. Let's just jump right back into the story. Thanks, guys. The Watcher at Crescent Lake. I've always loved Crescent Lake, and it's one of the most beautiful spots in Washington. Crystal clear water, surrounded by mountains and dense forest. It's the kind of place that makes you feel at peace. At least that's what I thought before my last trip there. It was late spring, and I had taken my kayak out to the quiet cove on the far side of the lake. It was secluded, far from the main trails, and I planned to spend the day fishing. Around mid-afternoon, I started to get the feeling, the one where you're being watched. I brushed it off at first, but it wouldn't go away. It was like an itch in the back of my mind. Then I noticed something. Across the cove, maybe 50 yards away, there was a figure standing inside the tree line at first. I thought it was a person, a real tall person. But as I squinted, I realized it wasn't quite right. The shoulders were too broad, the posture was too hunched. And the way it stood there, completely still, just watching me, it sent chills down my spine. I tried to act casual, casting my line again, but my hands were shaking. I glanced back, and it was still there. That's when I noticed something else. There was a faint movement in the bushes behind it, like more figures shifting in the shadows. I had decided I'd had enough fishing for one day. Slowly, I started paddling back towards the main part of the lake, keeping an eye on the tree line. The figure didn't follow me, but it didn't leave either. It just stood there, watching. When I reached the middle of the lake, I stopped and turned around. The figure was gone. I don't know what it was, but I haven't been back to the Crescent Lake since. Some things are better left alone. The Forgotten Trail. Mount St. Helens has always been one of my favorite places to explore. The forest around it is dense and alive with the sounds of nature. But there's also an eerie stillness in some parts, a silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. I was out on a solo hike, venturing down an old, overgrown trail I'd stumbled upon. It was far from the marked path, and the deeper I went, the more I felt I was stepping into another world. The grass was damp. The patches of mist clung to the underbrush. After about an hour of hiking, I noticed something odd in the mud. There were footprints, too, but not like I'd ever seen. They were enormous, at least twice the size of my own boot, and had clear toe impressions. The stride was huge too, like whatever had made them had legs much longer than a human's. I followed the tracks for a while. My curiosity overweighed my caution. They led to a small clearing where the sunlight barely broke through the canopy above. That's when I heard it, a low whistle, followed by a series of clicking sounds. I froze, scanning the area. At first I saw nothing, but then movement in the tree tops caught my eyes. High above, partially obscured by leaves, was a dark figure. It was swaying slightly, as if watching me. The creature was covered in hair and had a face that seemed both human and animal. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The creature let out a sharp, clicking noise and shifted its position. I didn't want to see what would happen next. Slowly, I backed away, keeping my eyes on it the whole time. Once I was out of sight, I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached my car. To this day, I can't explain what I saw, but I'll never forget the feeling of being watched by something that seemed far too intelligent and far too dangerous just to be an animal. The Cascades have always been my refuge. After a particular tough week, I decided to escape to one of my favorite places. I wanted solitude and chose a lesser-known trail recommended by the locals. The weather was perfect, crisp air, golden leaves fluttered down, and the faint scent of pine in the breeze. The hike started out beautifully. Birds chirped, and the sound of distant stream accompanied me as I made my way deeper into the forest. About 2 miles in, though, that's when things began to change. The bird song faded, and the forest grew eerily quiet. It wasn't until later that I realized how much that silence unsettled me. Then came the smell. It was sharp and musky, almost like wet fur and earth combined. At first, I thought it might be a bear. I stopped, scanning the area, but saw nothing unusual. I continued on, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. That's when I saw it. Just ahead, on the edge of the trail, stood a massive figure. My brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. At first glance, it looked like a man, broad-shouldered and tall, but it was covered head to toe in dark, matted hair. It had to be at least 8 foot tall, its head slightly conical, and its eyes, those eyes, they were deep-set, dark, and seemed to radiate intelligence. I froze. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. I didn't move, barely even breathe. Slowly I raised my hands, palmed out, as if to say, "I'm not here to hurt you." The creature let out a low, resonant sound, almost like a growl mixed with a hum. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't welcoming either. Then suddenly it turned and disappeared into the forest. The underbrush barely rustled as it moved, and within moments it was gone. I stood there, heart racing, trying to process what I had just experienced. I didn't finish the trail that day. Instead, I turned around and headed back to my car, glancing over my shoulder the whole way. Whatever it was, I was certain it had been watching me long before I noticed it. Night encounter on the Arkansas River. It was a warm summer night when my buddies and I decided to go float fishing on the Arkansas River. The air was thick with humidity, but the sky was clear. The stars above lit the landscape with a faint silver glow. We packed our gear, loaded up the boat, and hit the water, hoping for a good night of fishing. At first, everything was perfect, the gentle sounds of the river lapping against the boat, the occasional splash of the fish breaking the surface, and the distant calls of the night birds created a peaceful atmosphere. We were optimistic, sure that the night would bring plenty of bites. But as the hours dragged on, our enthusiasm started to wane. The fish weren't biting, and we found ourselves sitting in the boat, more bored than anything. One of my buddies had a spotlight, and in our boredom, we started scanning the riverbanks. shining the beam across the trees and rocks just to see what was out there. That's when we saw it. At first, it looked like a person standing on the bank, half hidden among the trees. It was upright, motionless, and tall, really tall. Someone joked that maybe it was a fisherman or a camper, but as the spotlight lingered, the details came into focus and we quickly realized this wasn't any person we'd ever seen. The figure was massive, its body covered in what looked like dark, shaggy hair. Its broad shoulders and thick limbs made it seem more animal than human, yet it stood upright like a human. It didn't flinch under the light, but instead just stood there, staring back at us with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "Is that?" one of my friends whispered, his voice trailing off. We didn't answer. We were transfixed, caught between curiosity and unease. Then it moved. The figure started to rock its shoulders back and forth, slowly at first, like it was agitated by the light. The motion was rhythmic, almost like it was trying to intimidate us. My buddy kept the spotlight on it, unable to look away, and the rocking grew more pronounced, its broad shoulders rolling like ocean waves. "Turn the light off," I finally muttered, my throat dry. But before anyone could react, the creature took a step forward, off the bank and into the river. My heart skipped a beat as we watched it wade into the water, moving with confidence that suggested this wasn't its first time. The current didn't seem to faze it. The creature moved deliberately, its head and shoulders above the surface, cutting through the water like a boat. Then it disappeared. "Where did it go?" someone blurted, his voice raising in panic. We scanned the water, the spotlight darting around in search of it. Moments later, its head popped up, a good distance closer than where it had been. It was swimming towards us, dipping below the surface and resurfacing like some kind of aquatic predator. Each time it reappeared, it was closer. That's when the fear really hit. "Start the boat," I shouted, my voice cracking. My buddy scrambled to the motor, fumbling with the ignition as the rest of us kept our eyes on the water. The creature disappeared again, and this time it stayed under for what felt like forever. The river was eerily calm, and the silence was deafening. Finally, the motor roared to life, breaking the tension. Without waiting to see where the creature would surface next, we took off, the boat cutting through the water as fast as it could go. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it chasing us, but the river behind us remained dark and empty. By the time we reached the dock and tied off the boat, we were all too shaken to speak. We loaded up our gear in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. On the drive home, we finally started talking, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it Bigfoot? A river creature? Something else entirely? None of us had answers, but we all agreed on one thing. Whatever it was real. For years, I kept the encounter to myself, afraid of how people might react if I told them. But recently, I've started feeling a pull to share my story, to connect with others who might have seen the same thing. I've even started looking for groups in my area who are into Bigfoot research. There's something out there in the rivers and woods of Arkansas, something we don't fully understand. And while I don't know if I'll ever see it again, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, watching, waiting. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that format. It's something different, but like I said, these stories are so incredible that they need to get out there. I started this whole channel to give people a safe place to share these encounters and to get stuff off their chest, because it's very traumatic, some of these encounters that people have. And sometimes people they email them to me and they don't want to come on the show. So this is a format and a way for those stories to get out there. And then sometimes I come across a story that I think you guys might find interest in. So I'm going to be pulling from different places and resources and the stories that are sent to me. But let me know if you guys enjoy these, and if so, I'll keep doing them and try to drop them every Thursday or Friday. And like I said, the real in-person interviews are not going anywhere. They'll still be here every single Monday. And if you guys love what I'm doing, you might consider becoming a member. It helps me be able to put this content out there more and put more effort into this channel. And hopefully someday I'll be doing this full time and this is all I'll do. But I appreciate all the support, guys. Thank you for being here and just being part of this amazing journey. And what an incredible world we live in. I'm going to say, I can't get off here without saying it. Stay prayed up, guys. We'll see you in the next episode.